Denver International Airport buzzed with its usual pre-dawn chaos. Rolling suitcases thudding across tiles, intercoms cracking out boarding announcements, and the scent of overpriced coffee hanging in the air. Through the revolving doors walked a woman who looked like she could have been anyone. That was the point. Karen Whitmore adjusted the strap of her faded leather backpack, her ivory linen dress rustling gently in the early March breeze. Her flats were plain, comfortable. No jewelry save for a delicate silver bracelet that had once belonged to her grandmother. To most, she looked like a middle school teacher headed home for spring break, not the co-founder of the fastest-growing airline in the United States. At 36, Karen moved with a quiet grace. Chestnut hair half-pinned, hazel eyes soft but observant. She didn't carry designer bags or wear any makeup. And this morning, with a red-eye flight to Seattle ahead, she craved one thing, a peaceful seat where she could read, think, and reflect. Her boarding pass? First class, seat 2A. The irony wasn't lost on her. She and her husband, Andrew Whitmore, had built Ascend Air from the ground up. While Andrew's face graced Forbes covers and investor summits, Karen stayed out of the spotlight. She wasn't interested in media attention. She was interested in people. She'd insisted they keep flying commercial, even though they now owned a Gulfstream jet that sat idle most weeks. It keeps us human, she had told Andrew once, and it keeps us honest. Karen had no interest in the airline's sleek first-class lounge. Instead, she walked directly to gate C-47, weaving between families, students, and executives in crisp blazers. When she reached the counter, she smiled at the young agent behind the desk. "Hi, checking in, Karen Whitmore, seat 2A. The agent, Claire, barely glanced at her at first, but then her gaze lingered, first at the linen dress, then at the scuffed backpack. Her smile faded. Ma'am, can you confirm your full name again?" Karen repeated it gently. "Karen Whitmore." Claire frowned, tapping quickly on her tablet. Her eyes scanned the manifest. Something wasn't computing. One moment. Just then, a man in a pinstriped suit standing nearby chuckled under his breath. "Economy's that way, sweetheart," he muttered, not bothering to look up from his phone. Karen didn't flinch. She walked through the boarding tunnel, greeted the cabin crew, and slipped into her seat. 2A, a window seat. Soft lighting, lavender scent in the air. She exhaled slowly. For a moment she thought maybe things would be uneventful. She was wrong. 2 rows behind her, a woman with bleached blonde curls, red lips, and diamonds the size of marbles dangling from her ears, leaned toward her seatmate and whispered, loud enough for several passengers to hear. "Who let her in here? That dress looks like it came out of a thrift store donation bin." The laughter around them was instant, sharp. "She's slumming it for attention," the woman continued, snapping a picture of Karen on her phone. "Watch, she's gonna claim emotional damage by the end of the flight." More chuckles, more stares. Karen didn't move. Her fingers touched the bracelet on her wrist. It always anchored her. Always had. Then came the click of polished shoes. A flight attendant, her name tag reading Miranda, approached. She was in her mid-40s, hair twisted into a tight bun, eyes scanning passengers like they were items on a grocery shelf. "Excuse me," she said sharply. "This is first class. May I see your boarding pass?" Karen blinked. "Of course," she said, handing it over. Miranda examined the ticket, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Stay right here," she said, and walked off. Karen turned to her book, but she could feel it happening. The shift, people watching, whispering, phones lifted slightly higher, the spectacle beginning. Near the galley, Miranda was joined by 2 other attendants, Tracy, young and nervous, and Logan, tall and brooding, with a permanent air of irritation. Miranda glanced back at Karen. "Does she look like 2A to you?" "She looks like someone who found a pass in the trash," Logan muttered. "She's probably pulling a stunt," Tracy added. The 3 shared a laugh. Then Miranda returned, holding the boarding pass like it was a counterfeit bill. "Ma'am," she said, voice now louder, "there seems to be an error. This seat is actually reserved for a VIP." Karen tilted her head slightly. "I booked this seat myself," she said, calm but firm. "Could you please check again?" Tracy stepped forward, arms crossed. "Ma'am, don't make a scene," Logan's voice followed, low and threatening. "Move, or we'll call security." The cabin had gone silent. Karen stood, adjusted her backpack, and walked quietly past the other first-class passengers. She didn't plead. She didn't argue. She simply moved. But every step felt like an accusation. She totally tried to sneak in, someone muttered. Look at her. Probably lives off a blog. Karen's new seat was 32C. Economy. Right over the wing. No legroom. No peace. As she sat down, a man across the aisle leaned over with a grin. Nice try, lady, he sneered. Should have worn something nicer. His wife raised her phone, filming her. This is going viral, she whispered, thumbs dancing. Karen didn't look at them. She opened her book, but the words blurred. She wasn't humiliated, yet, but the weight of their contempt pressed against her like gravity. Behind her, she could still hear the laughter. In front, the murmurs. Online, someone had already tweeted, Lady and Coach tried to fake first class. LOL, scammer in linen. Karen took a deep breath and turned the page. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Because what no one knew, at least not yet, was that this quiet woman in the linen dress didn't just belong in first class. She owned the airline, and her next move would shake the entire company to its core. The hum of the engines faded into the background as the sting of humiliation echoed louder in Karen's ears. Passengers were still boarding, but it felt like every glance was aimed directly at her. The seat in 32C was cramped and smelled faintly of cold pretzels and cheap sanitizer. Her knees bumped the tray table. The cushion beneath her was thin, uneven. She placed her backpack gently under the seat in front of her and sat upright, clutching her novel like a shield. Across the aisle, the man in the loud paisley tie, Greg, leaned over again. Seriously, he said, smirking. You thought you'd get away with that? Stick to your lane, lady. His wife, Lisa, didn't look up from her phone. She was live streaming now, narrating the moment like a gossip columnist at a red carpet disaster. This woman, Lisa whispered dramatically, tried to con her way into first class. And this, she gestured to Karen's modest linen dress, is what she thought would work. Budget Barbie strikes again. The camera lens pointed directly at Karen's face. Karen said nothing, not because she had no words, but because she knew their words said more about them than they ever could about her. The murmurs multiplied as the final passengers boarded. A teenager 2 rows behind snapped a photo and posted it with the caption, "Fake it till you get dragged to row 32. # first class fail." The tweet was already gaining traction. A flight attendant named Carla walked past, spotted Karen, and tilted her head toward Logan, who was now pacing the aisle like a bouncer. That's her, right? She whispered, loud enough to be heard. She's the one who caused the scene up front? Logan nodded, adding with a smirk. Thinks she's someone special. Probably printed that boarding pass at Kinko's. Karen's jaw tightened. Her gaze remained fixed on the page of her novel, even though she hadn't read a single word. A woman in yoga pants across the row scoffed, nudging her seatmate. This is why airlines need stricter boarding checks. No class, no clue. The whispers grew louder, bolder now, because no one feared consequence. In their eyes, Karen was invisible, an easy target, and worst of all, alone. As the plane began taxiing, Tracy, the same attendant who had crossed her arms in first class, made her way down the aisle, handing out menus and blankets. She stopped at Karen's row and looked down with a smirk. Need anything back here? She asked, voice dripping with sarcasm. Or are you good with pretzels? A few passengers nearby chuckled. Greg guffawed, his voice booming across the cabin. Hope you didn't expect champagne back here, sweetheart. Karen gave the slightest shake of her head. I'm fine, she replied evenly. Tracy shrugged and walked off. Moments later, Logan passed by with a stack of blankets. He tossed one toward Karen, but it landed halfway across her lap, sliding onto the floor. Don't say we didn't hook you up, he said, winking at Greg. The 2 men shared a smug laugh. At the front of the plane, Miranda's voice rang out again, pretending to joke with the crew, but every word laced with poison. Economy's full of surprises today, she called out to Tracy. Some people don't know their place. Karen's fingers closed tighter around her book. She wasn't angry, yet. She was assessing, watching. Every interaction, every slight, and every person who laughed. The cabin lights dimmed, the plane lifted into the air. From 32C, Karen watched the city lights fade beneath the clouds. Somewhere above Denver, her patience was hardening into resolve. The drink cart came around. Tracy smiled brightly at every row, except Karen's. Oops, she said flatly, skipping 32C. Ran out. Logan muttered as he passed. Should have stayed home, backpack girl. A few rows ahead, A college kid raised his phone again. The caption was brutal. This woman tried to fake first class, and now she's getting roasted. I can't stop watching. He tagged the airline, added laughing emojis, and hit post. Karen sipped quietly from her own water bottle, her face unreadable, her poise unshaken. But she was making mental notes. Every insult, every recording, every crew member who laughed. She turned another page. Then the meal service began. Miranda came down the aisle with a tray full of first-class leftovers. She paused beside Karen, turned to Tracy, and said, loudly, "Nothing for her." Tracy nodded in fake solemnity. "She's lucky to be on board at all." Another burst of snickers. A man nearby muttered, "She should have walked to Seattle." Karen remained silent. But her silence was no longer for protection. It was preparation. Halfway through the flight, Greg leaned over once more, the glow of his wife's phone still casting light on Karen's face. "Hey," he said, grinning like a kid pulling the wings off a fly. "What's your deal? You do this often? Scam airlines?" Karen turned to him slowly. Her hazel eyes, clear and calm, met his. "I'm just traveling," she said softly. "Like you." Greg scoffed. "Yeah, but we paid for it." Lisa leaned in, laughing. "This is gold. Keep talking, lady. TikTok's gonna love this." Karen said nothing more. But something behind her calm eyes shifted. They didn't know it yet, but they were handing her every piece she needed. She was about to show them what real power looked like. And it wasn't loud. It didn't wear diamonds. It didn't need to shout. It only needed one voice in the right room at the right moment. And that moment? It was coming. The plane began its descent into Seattle as the early morning sky shifted from charcoal gray to the soft blue of dawn. The cabin lights glowed dimly, casting long shadows on Karen's face. She had barely moved from her seat during the entire flight, except to politely decline service that was never genuinely offered. The hum of idle chatter returned as passengers stirred awake. Those who had slept now stretched their arms. Those who had watched Karen all flight still eyed her with suspicion, amusement, or disdain. In row 1, David Holt, the sweeted businessman who had snickered at her in Denver, leaned toward a woman in pearls. "She's the one who held us up at boarding," he said, nodding toward the back. "Tried to play VIP in that thrift store getup." The woman sniffed. "Ether Air's getting too loose with its standards. These people don't belong up front." Karen didn't hear their words, but she could feel them. The energy shifted with every whisper, every turned glance. As the aircraft touched down and taxied to the gate, flight attendant Miranda appeared again. This time, standing at the front of the economy cabin, her arms folded and eyes scanning for someone she clearly didn't want to thank. When Karen stood, backpack slung over her shoulder, Miranda didn't even fake a smile. "Hope you learned something," she said with icy precision as Karen stepped forward. Tracy stood just behind her, arms crossed. "Stick to buses next time," Tracy said with a smirk. Logan didn't speak, he just gave a mock salute as she passed. Karen didn't respond, her expression didn't flicker. But her spine remained straight, her stride unbroken, her silence heavy with purpose. She exited into the terminal. Outside, the Seattle air was cool and damp. The sky overhead was layered with clouds, soft and gray like wool. She hailed a cab, her fingers still gently wrapped around the strap of her backpack. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Karen's phone buzzed. Dozens of notifications lit up her screen. She opened one. It was Lisa's video. The caption read, "First class fail. Know your place." 2.1 million views, 184,000 likes, 63,000 shares. Karen scrolled through the comments. Well now, this woman thought she could fake her way up front. She looks like she sells essential oils from her car. First class isn't for people like her. This is why we need dress codes. Bet she sues, play victim and cash out. And in between the cruelty were voices trying to defend her. This is disgusting, y'all judged her just by her clothes. What if she actually paid for the seat? Not a good look, Ether Air. Do better. But those voices were drowned in the sea of scorn. Karen didn't type a response. She didn't issue a public statement. She simply opened her laptop and pulled up a document. Ether Air Internal Service Violation Log, updated March 2024. There were 26 incidents listed before hers. Now she added a 27th. Flight 472, March 3, 2024. Class-based discrimination, witnessed and recorded, multiple staff involved. Passenger, Karen Whitmore. At that moment, across town in a sleek glass tower overlooking Puget Sound, a meeting room was being prepared. Ether Air's headquarters shimmered in the rising sunlight. Inside, executives gathered, board members, legal counsel, communications directors. Miranda, Tracy, and Logan sat near the front of the boardroom, freshly flown in from Denver. Their uniforms were pressed, their smiles tight. "They probably flew us in to thank us," Miranda whispered, smoothing her skirt. "For protecting the brand," Tracy nodded. Logan leaned back in his chair, arms behind his head. "Bet we get bonuses." The door opened. Silence fell. In walked Andrew Whitmore, CEO of Ether Air, tall, lean, 41, with sharp features and calm authority. He didn't smile. His eyes swept the room, resting briefly on the trio. Behind him came Karen. Same ivory linen dress, same silver bracelet. No backpack this time. Every seat shifted. Miranda's eyes widened. Tracy's smile collapsed. Logan sat up straight, the blood draining from his face. Karen didn't say a word as she took her place beside her husband at the head of the table. Andrew adjusted his jacket and addressed the room. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. We've gathered here because of a deeply troubling incident aboard Flight 472. He turned to the screen behind him and clicked a remote. The monitor lit up. Lisa's video played, every sneer, every insult, every joke. Loud, clear, unedited. The room was deathly quiet. Karen sat still, hands folded. Andrew's voice was even, but his eyes burned. "The woman you humiliated is Karen Whitmore, my wife, the co-founder of Ether Air, and the person who wrote the very charter on customer dignity that you swore to uphold." Gasps rippled. Miranda went pale. Tracy looked at her shoes. Logan's jaw clenched. Karen finally spoke. Her voice was calm but sharp as glass. "I'm not here to point fingers," she said, sliding a printed report across the table. "This is a record of 27 confirmed instances of discrimination aboard Ether Air flights. People judge by how they looked, dressed, or sounded. I was one. Others had no voice." She paused. "I'm not asking for compensation. I'm asking for justice." Andrew stood again. "We will vote today. Do we protect a brand that tolerates humiliation, or do we protect people?" He raised his hand. Every board member followed. Unanimous. The decision: accountability. What came next would rewrite the story for every airline employee who ever forgot that dignity doesn't wear labels, and for the trio who forgot who she was. Their lesson was just beginning. The vote was unanimous. Not a single hand hesitated. Karen watched as executives, shareholders, and senior managers all committed, at least on paper, to reform. But she knew votes meant nothing without follow-through. Policy change wasn't enough. People had to change. Andrew turned toward the trio sitting closest to the screen. Miranda, Tracy, and Logan, once smug, now silent. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You didn't just mishandle a customer," he said. "You betrayed the culture this company claims to uphold." Karen stood. "We won't fire you," she said plainly. "But you will learn." Miranda blinked, confused. "Excuse me? You're being reassigned," Karen continued, unfolding a printed outline. "Each of you will serve a 4-week rotation in a role that reflects the harm you caused. Effective immediately," Andrew added. Miranda's reassignment, the customer complaint desk. Tracy's, economy cabin duty, non-premium flights only. Logan's, baggage claim, rain or shine. All three would be retrained under the original service charter, line by line, by the very woman they tried to humiliate. The silence in the room was brutal. Miranda opened her mouth to protest, but Andrew cut her off. "No rebuttals. You've already had your say," loudly, on a plane full of witnesses. Karen slid a second document across the table. This outlines a new initiative, a company-wide training overhaul. It was titled, "Respect Beyond Appearance," a global campaign to redefine professionalism, empathy, and dignity in every corner of the airline, from gate agents to pilots. It would include live training, storytelling sessions with passengers who'd been judged, and regular audits of onboard conduct. "Starting with you," Karen said, turning to the trio, "this will not be performative. It will be personal." The meeting ended not with applause but with quiet nods. Some executives stayed behind, shaken. A few approached Karen to apologize. She accepted their words, but not without challenge. "Don't apologize to me," she said gently. "Apologize with how you treat people going forward." Outside, cameras already waited. The leaked video had exploded online. News outlets were spinning the story into every headline imaginable. "Billionaire's wife publicly humiliated. teaches airline a lesson in class. CEO's wife goes undercover, exposes airline bias. Flight crew mocked passenger, didn't know she owned 40% of the company. Karen declined interviews. She wasn't interested in going viral. She was interested in going deeper. Back inside the Ether Air building, Miranda sat stiffly at her new desk, a headset on, her screen flashing with a backlog of complaints. The first caller's voice was already raised. "You think humiliating paying customers is okay? That's your customer service model now?" Miranda flinched. She couldn't even offer a script. The irony wasn't lost on her. Now she was the one under judgment. Next to her, a junior staff member handed her Rachel's printed charter. "You're supposed to read through this between calls," they said flatly. Miranda skimmed the first line. "Every passenger carries a story. And every story deserves respect." She closed her eyes, swallowed hard. Elsewhere, Tracy reported to her first economy shift. Gone was her glossy smile. She was handed a trolley, a tight apron, and a roster of 183 passengers, none of whom cared about her name, only their tray being late or their seat not reclining. Halfway through the aisle, a woman snapped, "Oh, you're the one from the video. You mocked that lady and coach. Shame on you." Tracy flushed. The woman refused her meal. In row 26, a child sneezed on her shoes. In row 31, a man gave her a fake tip in the form of a gum wrapper. She couldn't smile her way out of it. The mockery online had followed her into real life. And when she returned to the crew quarters, she found the Rachel Whitmore charter laminated and posted on the wall. Rule number 7 was circled in red. Silence in the face of cruelty is complicity. Meanwhile, Logan stood at the airport's West Terminal, baggage claim. It was pouring outside. He wore a reflective vest, his boots soaked through. He hauled a 60-pound duffel off the carousel. A woman snatched it from his hands, muttering, "You people ruined my niece's trip. Saw it on TikTok." He bit his tongue. All day, he heard it. "You're the guy who laughed at her. You said she didn't belong. You work for her now, right?" By noon, his back ached. By evening, his LinkedIn had been flooded with angry comments. Screenshots of his face from the video. A viral thread dissecting his behavior. One post read, "This guy thought kindness was optional. Now he's lifting luggage in the rain." And while the three of them learned the taste of humble pie, Karen returned to her hotel, logged into her laptop, and met with a group of junior flight attendants via Zoom. She didn't lecture them. She asked them questions. "What does dignity look like in your cabin? What's one thing you've seen that made you uncomfortable? What makes you feel invisible?" Their answers filled her notes. Their stories shaped her reforms. She wasn't interested in punishing people forever. She was interested in transformation, but only for those willing to change. And for those who weren't, there were consequences. Not to make an example, but to make a point. By the following morning, the story had left the confines of Flight 472 and exploded across the globe. From Reddit threads to viral TikToks, podcasts to primetime news, everyone had an opinion about the woman in the linen dress. Some called her a hero. Others called her a fraud. But no one called her invisible anymore. The hashtag had Karen Whitmore trended on X for 36 hours straight. At first, people assumed Karen was the insult. Then they read the full story. Wait, her name is actually Karen? And she's the victim? Plot twist of the decade. This ain't your typical Karen. This woman is Karen Whitmore, and she's a force of nature. Respect in linen, power without volume. I'm taking notes. The original video posted by Lisa had now crossed 12 million views. But the tone of the comments had changed dramatically. Imagine filming someone's humiliation, only to find out they wrote your entire flight policy. Lisa thought she was catching a scammer. Turns out she was documenting classism in real time. Everyone on that flight is about to learn what real accountability looks like. Old tweets from Miranda, Tracy, and Logan began to resurface. One from Miranda, dated 2 years prior, read, "Flying coach is like volunteering for punishment. No thanks." It was retweeted 48,000 times with the comment, "And yet, here we are." A video montage began to circulate online. Footage of Karen in her ivory dress walking through the terminal, her quiet dignity in stark contrast to the mocking laughter around her. Someone had set it to soft piano music and ended it with her quote from the boardroom, "I'm not asking for compensation. I'm asking for justice." The clip was shared by celebrities, influencers, and even 2 former US presidents. Karen didn't watch the video. She didn't read the praise. Instead, she spent that morning answering emails from passengers who had quietly endured what she had exposed. There were hundreds. A teenage boy who was laughed at for speaking broken English in first class. A single mother who'd been told her backpack didn't fit the image of a premium seat. An elderly man with a thick accent who'd been reassigned to coach by accident. None of them were famous. None had a platform. But now, they had her. Karen gathered their stories into a new document titled Project Cabin Light Witness Statements. Every story, every date, every staff name logged, timestamped, and compiled. And then she did something no one expected. She sent a letter, personally written and signed, to every passenger on Flight 472. It read, "You were part of a flight that revealed something important, not just about an airline, but about us. You witnessed the way judgment can spread like wildfire and how silence can be louder than action. But you also witnessed something else. That dignity can't be stripped by laughter, and that power doesn't always announce itself. We are changing, and you helped ignite it. Thank you for flying Ether Air. The sky you return to will not be the same." Karen Whitmore, co-founder Fane. Some passengers were stunned to receive it. Some were ashamed. A few wrote back apologizing. Greg, the man with the loud tie, posted a video. He looked uncomfortable, wearing a hoodie instead of his usual flashy shirt. "Yeah, so I was on that flight. I was one of the guys who... Yeah. I didn't know who she was. But that's not really the point, is it? I should have treated her like a person, period." His apology went viral too. Not because it was perfect, but because it was public. And Lisa? She deleted her accounts. The attention, once intoxicating, had turned bitter. Former followers turned on her, accusing her of cruelty, classism, and attention-seeking. Her attempt at mockery had become a case study in systemic bias. Meanwhile, Karen met with Ether Air's design team. They weren't there to talk seat cushions or flight paths. They were there to rebuild the passenger experience, from the gate to the air, and every interaction in between. People don't need to be impressed, Karen told them. They need to feel seen. She proposed something radical. A passenger empathy simulator. Staff would wear VR headsets and experience a flight from the eyes of someone in coach. A nervous immigrant. A grieving traveler. A student on their first trip. A mother juggling 2 toddlers and no sleep. Each scenario would include whispered judgments, ignored requests, fake smiles, and sudden kindness. They'll learn, Karen said, because they'll feel it. The head of training wiped a tear from her cheek after testing it herself. "I didn't realize how much of that I've been blind to," she whispered. Outside the building, a new poster was unveiled, Ether Air's first in a new series of global billboards. It showed Karen. Not in a power suit, not photoshopped, just her. Sitting in seat 2A, linen dress, book in hand, a faint smile on her lips. The tagline, "Respect doesn't wear a label." Below it, "Welcome aboard the new Ether Air." And while the world now looked at Karen Whitmore as a symbol, she never stopped being the same woman who chose to walk through the gate instead of hiding in a private lounge. Because the only way to change the sky was to fly through it with the people who live below it every day. 3 months had passed since Flight 472. Karen Whitmore boarded her next flight quietly, Denver to Chicago, 7:05 a.m. departure. No fanfare. No entourage. Same linen dress, same silver bracelet, same well-worn backpack. She moved through the terminal like she always had, with purpose, but without spectacle. At the gate, a young agent with a fresh uniform and a nervous smile greeted her. "Good morning, Miss Whitmore," she said, eyes lighting up. "Welcome back." Karen nodded kindly. "Thank you, Maya." The name tag on the agent's shirt read Maya Sanderson, trainee. She looked barely 21, but her professionalism was already strong. Karen appreciated that. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, the air shifted. She could feel it. Not judgment, something else, respect. Inside the cabin, everything looked the same. Clean, precise, quiet. But this time, it wasn't the design that felt different. It was the tone. The crew smiled, genuinely. Passengers were greeted by name. There were no whispers, no stares, just a gentle kind of attentiveness that had become Ether Air's new standard. Karen made her way to seat 2A. She slid her backpack beneath the seat, pulled out her novel, and settled in. Then came a voice, low, measured, familiar. Welcome back, Miss Whitmore. Karen looked up. It was Logan. The same Logan who had smirked while she was shamed. The same man who threw a blanket on her lap like it was a joke. Now he stood at the cabin entrance, posture upright, uniform slightly wrinkled from work, but neat. His voice was steady, but there was something else behind it. Something raw. Karen closed her book slowly. Logan, she said, nodding. He took one step closer, his hands clasped in front of him, not defensive but careful. Considered. I wanted to say thank you, he said. Karen raised an eyebrow. For what? For not firing me, he said, then hesitated, and for not humiliating me back. The passengers around them were still boarding. No one was paying attention yet. Logan continued. I thought I understood this job. I thought I understood people, but I only knew my version of them. He swallowed hard. Baggage claim taught me something. Everyone's carrying weight, not just the luggage kind, the human kind. Karen's eyes met his. She didn't smile yet. She was still listening. There was a woman last week, Logan said, his voice softer. Single mom. Missed her connecting flight because her stroller broke in the terminal. I helped her rebook, carried her bags all the way to the shuttle, and I thought of you. Karen tilted her head slightly. I didn't do it because of policy, he added. I did it because it felt right. Now she smiled. Sounds like you're finally flying at the right altitude. He laughed, quietly, self-consciously. Thank you, he repeated. Truly. Karen nodded. Keep doing the work. Not for the promotion, not for applause, just for the people. Logan stepped back, gave a respectful nod, and returned to the front of the cabin. Karen opened her book again, but the words glowed a little warmer. Across the aisle, a young woman, no older than 20, clutched a worn duffel bag and nervously fidgeted with the zipper. Her hoodie was 2 sizes too big. Her eyes darted from tray table to seatbelt like she was afraid of doing something wrong. Karen noticed her immediately. She leaned over slightly, her voice gentle. Is this your first time flying? The girl blinked. Yeah, how did you know? Karen smiled. Because I remember mine. The girl relaxed, exhaling a shaky breath. I'm moving to Chicago, starting school. I didn't think I'd ever be able to sit here though. They bumped me up last minute, said someone donated the upgrade. Karen didn't say a word. She just nodded, placed her bookmark carefully between the pages, and whispered, That's wonderful. You belong here. The girl grinned, her eyes shining with the kind of gratitude that only comes from being seen. As the plane ascended into the brightening sky, Karen looked out the window, the clouds parting below. This was the new ether air. Not perfect, but possible. Because kindness had become contagious. Because justice wasn't just a press release, it was personal. And because one quiet woman in a linen dress had refused to let silence win. She turned another page in her novel and breathed in the lavender scent of the cabin. Her work wasn't over. It was only just beginning. 6 months later, Ether Air didn't just recover from the scandal of Flight 472. It was redefining the entire airline industry. The Respect Beyond Appearance initiative that Karen had proposed now had a name people recognized in airports across the world. Airlines from Canada to Singapore were requesting partnerships. Training materials were being translated into 6 languages. News anchors dubbed it the empathy revolution at 30,000 feet. But Karen never sought credit. She stayed behind the curtain, focused on implementation, on people, not press. Inside Ether Air's Seattle headquarters, the culture had transformed. Recruiters no longer asked questions like, "Can you project authority?" They asked, "Can you listen when it's hardest?" At training centers, new hires were handed a booklet titled The Passenger is a Story, authored anonymously. Page 1 contained one quote only. Your job is not to judge the traveler. Your job is to walk them safely through the sky. Staff had taken to calling it Karen's Bible, even though her name was never printed on the cover. It didn't need to be. Its message had already flown across the world. Logan's journey. After his brief encounter with Karen on that return flight, Logan didn't just continue working, he began mentoring. He volunteered to run training simulations for new flight attendants, sharing his own mistakes openly. I misread a woman because of a dress, he told a room of 50 recruits one morning. What I didn't realize was she had read the whole industry before I ever showed up. Logan no longer rolled his eyes at economy requests. He carried strollers without being asked. He offered warmth without performance. Passengers wrote in about him now. Not to complain, to commend. Logan from Gate 9 helped my father with Alzheimer's find his way to his gate. He didn't just treat him like a customer, he treated him like a person. Miranda's wake-up call. At first, Miranda buckled under the backlash. Her name trended for all the wrong reasons. Past tweets, Reddit threads, even her LinkedIn became a battleground. But it wasn't the internet that changed her. It was the phone calls. Working at the customer complaint desk had exposed her to more grief than she'd ever imagined. A widower whose suitcase of ashes had been lost. A mother whose special needs child had been denied pre-boarding. A black woman removed from a flight for looking suspicious. Each story chipped at the wall Miranda had built around herself. Eventually, she stopped reading from the company script and started listening with intent. When her reassignment ended, she requested to stay. "I want to remain here," she told the VP of Operations, "because the day I forget these voices is the day I go backward." Karen read the report quietly. She smiled. Real change wasn't fast. But it was happening, Tracy's reckoning. Tracy had the hardest fall. The public branded her the mean girl of the skies. Screenshots of her scoffing at Karen in economy became GIFs. Customers refused her service. Tips dried up. But it was one moment that shattered her ego. She was serving drinks in Coach when a little girl, no older than 8, looked up and said, "You're the lady who was mean to the nice woman in the dress." Tracy blinked. "Mommy said you're learning now? Are you better?" That question haunted her. Later, Tracy wrote a handwritten letter addressed to Karen. "I thought first class made me better than people. I forgot who I was before the uniform. Thank you for showing me who I didn't want to become." Karen folded the letter gently and tucked it into her journal. She never shared it publicly. But she carried it with her on every flight, not as a trophy, as a reminder. Bookmark the movement spreads. Universities invited Karen to speak. She declined most, but made time for one. A community college in Oakland. The same one she had attended years ago, working nights to afford tuition. She stood in front of a lecture hall full of first-generation students, janitors, single mothers, and hopeful dreamers. She didn't talk about first class. She talked about first chances. "How you look isn't a resume," she said. "And where you sit doesn't define your value. We all belong in the sky." Applause didn't matter to her, but the letters from students afterward did. "I wore my hoodie to my internship interview and still got hired. I thought of you. My mom flew for the first time in her life last week. The crew treated her like a queen. Ether Air, seat 22B. Karen smiled, reading those notes on her next flight to New York. She still sat in 2A, still wore linen, still carried her grandmother's bracelet. And across from her, a flight attendant offered a blanket to a nervous teenage boy in Coach. Not because he asked, because she noticed. The sky had changed, but not because of outrage. Because one woman chose grace over noise, dignity over revenge, and service over status. Her voice hadn't been loud, it had been clear, and sometimes clarity echoes longer than any scream. The ballroom at the Global Aviation Summit in Geneva was nothing short of majestic. Marble columns, crystal chandeliers, delegates in tailored suits, polished shoes, and silk ties. But when Karen Whitmore stepped onto the stage, it wasn't her linen dress or understated presence that drew attention. It was the silence that followed her. Thousands of executives, policymakers, and aviation professionals leaned forward, not because she demanded it, but because she earned it. The moderator introduced her simply, Karen Whitmore, co-founder of Ether Air, architect of one of the most impactful cultural transformations in modern aviation history. The applause was polite at first, but when Karen adjusted the mic and began to speak, something shifted in the air. She didn't begin with data, she began with a memory. "A year ago, I was removed from my first-class seat, not because I caused a disturbance, not because I was dangerous, but because I didn't look like I belonged." A rustle moved through the room. That flight turned into a trial, a public one. I wasn't given due process. I was judged by fabric, not fact. She paused, and that would have been the end of it, if I weren't the co-owner of the airline. Now the rustle turned into murmurs. Karen let the words breathe. But what about the people who don't own a piece of the sky? Who aren't married to power? Who don't have a platform or a voice? What happens to them? The room went still. We created respect beyond appearance because dignity should never be reserved for the wealthy, or the well-dressed, or the well-connected. It should be the baseline. She pulled out a small, worn object, her grandmother's bracelet. This belonged to a woman who cleaned houses so I could go to college. She never flew, never sat in 2A, but she taught me more about grace than any boardroom ever did. She held it high, not as a prop but as a symbol. This bracelet has no price, but it carries value. So do the people walking through your gates, in sweatshirts, in sandals, in silence. Your passengers are not brands, they are stories. The audience was no longer just listening, they were feeling. Karen clicked a remote. A screen behind her came alive. Images appeared. A father carrying a child through turbulence. A college student holding a book instead of a briefcase. An elderly woman being assisted down the aisle by a smiling crew member. A young man crying softly in a window seat, headed to bury his mother. These aren't moments of customer service, Karen said. They're moments of humanity. She turned back to the crowd. This industry was built on distance, on soaring above. But the future of flight will be built on connection. Because when we see each other at 35,000 feet, without labels, without assumptions, that's when we've truly learned how to fly. Silence again. And then applause, not polite, roaring. People stood, some wiped their eyes, some didn't clap, they just placed a hand over their heart. And in the crowd, near the front, sat Maya, the trainee gate agent who had welcomed Karen back at Denver. Now promoted to supervisor, she whispered to herself, she changed everything. Later that night, Karen sat alone on the hotel balcony, looking out over Lake Geneva. The moon shimmered on the water like her bracelet catching the light. Andrew called from home. Watch the whole thing, he said, voice warm with pride. Karen smiled. Was it too much? No, he replied. It was everything it needed to be. In the days that followed, more airlines signed on, more passengers wrote in, and the Passenger as a Story was officially adopted by the International Aviation Ethics Council as a recommended global code. But Karen didn't stay in the spotlight. She returned to her quiet seat in 2A, her novel, her linen. Because her legacy wasn't about fame. It was about flight, not just through the air, but through the barriers we build between each other. On a spring morning weeks later, a woman boarded an Ether Air flight in a faded denim jacket, her suitcase missing a wheel, her eyes tired. The flight attendant offered her a warm drink, a real blanket, a quiet smile. No one asked what she did for a living. No one judged her seat. No one snapped a photo. And in the back of the plane, Karen watched from across the aisle. She didn't say a word. She just knew. This was the sky she'd fought for, one where no one flew beneath anyone else. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect or feel seen or believe in quiet strength, then don't let it stop here. Subscribe to Aiva Stories for more true-to-life tales where dignity rises, voices are heard, and justice finds its wings. Every week, we bring you stories that challenge assumptions, celebrate resilience, and remind us all, the smallest moments can spark the biggest change. Hit that bell so you never miss a moment that matters. Because this world doesn't need more noise. It needs more truth. And together, we're telling it.